timely discussion, Russian disinformation against Ukraine. My name is Karolina Zbytniewska. I'm editor-in-chief at EURACTIV Poland, and I will have a pleasure and honor of chairing this important debate. We are joined by a distinguished panel representing a range of perspectives on this crucial topic. Let me begin by introducing our speakers. So here with us, Martyna Bildziukiewicz, Deputy Head of Division in the European External Action Service, Yevhen Mahda, Executive Director of the Institute of World Policy, Aleksandra Wójtowicz, Analyst for New Technologies and Digitalization at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, or PISM, and last but not least, Péter Krekó, Executive Director at Political Capital. As Ukraine moves toward the EU, our panel will explore how to counter Russia's disinformation offensive, its key narratives and intentions, the vulnerabilities it exploits in the European societies, in the European Union as a whole, and in specific nations, regions, and what is being done to resist it. So let's start with Martyna Bildziukiewicz to set the big picture EU perspective. So Martyna, what are the major disinformation narratives in the European Union, and how is Russia playing the Union, and which Ukraine-related topics are the most exploited?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I will concentrate maybe on four main narratives that we see these days that are very pertinent to the current geopolitical situation. Of course, I could name many more because I've been observing Russian disinformation for quite a few years now. But I think there will be many more in-depth insights from experts from different countries. But what I really want to highlight to start with is the narrative about peace. This is a very important one right now, given what we are expecting, hoping or not hoping to happen this week and the weeks that will follow. What we really need to understand is that when the Kremlin speaks about peace, it basically means submission. So peace means something completely different for Russia than it means for Ukraine or for the Western world and for the European Union that support Ukraine. The narrative that Russia is using is about the war being unnecessarily prolonged by Western support, and Russia being misunderstood while being an actual peacemaker. But of course, peace for Russia means actually that Ukraine would capitulate and would remain in isolation without any relationship to the European Union or to NATO. So this is the most prevalent one and the one that we really need to pay attention to, given what is happening globally. The second one that I wanted to highlight is about the EU being a weak and divided puppet. So Russian disinformation thrives on cracks in the European unity and works really day and night to deepen them or to make us believe that they exist. On the other hand, there is this very long, meaning a very long existing narrative about the EU not being able to make any of its own decisions, but rather being completely dependent on the US and also being completely exhausted by supporting Ukraine, which doesn't give Europe anything to benefit from. Then the narrative that I think we've all heard before many times, but unsurprisingly, this is still very much in the information environment. This is about NATO or the EU or the West as such being responsible for this war. So it's about obscuring Russia's role in the full-scale invasion and rather using this persistent myth of NATO expansion being the root cause of the war. Really, I have seen this narrative since 2014, really, but the Kremlin doesn't seem to be bored with it at all. It is still using it very much, again, trying to make us believe that it's not Russia's imperial ambitions whatsoever that are to blame for what is happening in Ukraine currently. And I also want to mention because this is also quite important in the current context, and we saw great examples, well, quite telling examples of this narrative just a few days ago. This is about rewriting the history and portraying Russia as liberator. So in the world of Moscow, one could say tanks always roll in as liberation, whether it's Berlin in 1944 or 45 or Bucha in 2022. For the Kremlin, it's the same narrative. We are freeing the world from Nazism, actually. But you could see during the Victory Day parade in Moscow just a few days ago how this actually the Nazi propaganda is being at play to justify again Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and also to make us believe that Russia is invincible, and what is even worse, has some kind of moral superiority over us. But apart from the narratives, I just want to say, if that's okay, I don't mean to take too much space, but I just want to make a point that I think is quite important right now. The narratives, the disinformation narratives, which are everywhere right now, are a problem, a challenge that we deal with every day. But I think an even bigger problem that is very much linked to that is all those tactics, techniques, and procedures that Russia is using to flood the information space. The current technological advancements are also helping Russia having more content, manipulative, disinformative, or outright false, everywhere in all possible social media, in all possible traditional media, but also having the whole ecosystem of information manipulation employed. So on the one hand, you have, of course, channels on across the digital space, but on the other hand, you have politicians, you have diplomats, you have the whole ecosystem of so-called media saying exactly the same thing. So we're up against the whole ecosystem, which is also now powered by technological developments that make it possible to produce even more content, even faster, and sometimes in a more sophisticated way, even though this is not Russia's main goal for the content to be sophisticated. The main goal really is to pollute our information environment as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Even some of the media outlets are being recommended during presidential debates taking place in Poland. For example, yesterday, that was the case. Thank you so much, Martyna. Now let's zoom in on Poland. Let's move to Aleksandra Wójtowicz for a national concrete perspective on how disinformation looks in practice in Poland, especially as Poland is holding the presidency in the Council of the European Union. So, Aleksandra, what are the major disinformation narratives circulating in Poland, especially in view of the Russian disinformation targeting Ukraine?
Of course. Here I would work a lot on what Martyna said before, because the very narratives, they do not differ that much. There are themes that are occurring since 2020, 2022 for really quite a long time, and they include anti-EU sentiment and all other narratives that are like the sub-narratives that are related to that. There are narratives about Ukraine, and they will be very prominent. They will be both the narratives about war in Ukraine, our military aid to Ukraine, but also about the Ukrainians living in Poland. And then third, we'll also have narratives about migrants in general. There's a huge theme for this year's presidential campaign. The topic of migration is omnipresent. A lot of candidates will discuss that. And again, a lot of content that we're going to see online will be disinformative. Then, apart from that, of course, we still do have disinformation that is about climate and about climate policies. Even you did mention yesterday's debate, where quite a few candidates mentioned the European Green Deal as this kind of a threat to the citizens. One of the candidates, he even mentioned something that is called a blue deal, which is a very deep conspiracy theory that's suggesting that the EU is going to control citizens' access to water. So to sum this up, the narratives are similar. But what we're seeing now throughout the Polish throughout the Polish presidential elections is that they're going, when we look at the most significant disinformation accounts, both on X, so ex Twitter, as well as on TikTok, we see that these narratives are getting more severe than they used to be throughout, for example, even the previous parliamentary elections. So they're going more into this conspiracy route. For example, one of the most prominent accounts on Twitter, he's now also working with anti-Semitic tropes. So, for example, he's suggesting not only that EU is a broken institution that cannot work, etc., we know that, but he's also suggesting that the leaders of the EU are Jewish, which is purely anti-Semitic. So this is what we're seeing. The other thing, again, because we're having the presidential elections now, so even though these are the omnipresent narratives that I have mentioned, disinformation actors are also working very strongly with incidents and what with the things that are happening exactly throughout the debates, throughout other campaign events, etc. So this disinformation sphere get kind of more differentiated. And then last but not least, we're also seeing the strict electoral disinformation. What do I mean by that? This is not only disinformation around the elections, about migration, about climate. It is disinformation purely about the elections. So disinformation stating that the election result will not be sincere, that the elections were rigged. This is also disinformation that is discouraging the voters from going and voting. So this started to happen already. And the closer to the election, so within this week that we're experiencing now, there's going to be even more narratives like that. So this is happening. Interestingly, Russian actors have been also attributed to some of these situations because, for example, doppelganger campaign, so coordinated inauthentic campaign coordinated by Russia, was detected. That is now highly targeting Poland in the elections.
Okay, when I'm listening to both Aleksandra and Martyna, maybe a little follow-up question to one of you, both of you. How to tell when something is disinformation, something in the public sphere, social media sphere, versus when it is opinion, sincere, honest opinion of the people. For example, the newest research by More in Common think tank shows that there are anti-migrant, extremely anti-migrant sentiments, especially among the voters of the ruling civic platform, so the Donald Tusk's party. So how to say that it's the result of disinformation, not the real actual fear and opinion and interpretation of the reality?
So I would say, if I may, that what we understand as disinformation is coordinated and fully aware campaign that is meant to mislead others. It's intentional. So most of the things that we see online are usually something that we would call misinformation. So people would feed themselves on disinformation. They would believe that because that is obviously the aim of disinformation. And they would further share it because they believe it. They think they're doing well. They think what they do is actually helpful to others. But how to decide that something is disinformation? Attribution, of course, is difficult, and disinformation actors work very efficiently for countering activities to have it difficult and for it to make it more difficult to attribute. But it is possible. For example, numerous narratives about migration were shared by campaigns like, for example, Doppelganger that I have mentioned, or Overload. It is possible to do this analysis, for example, on social media, to check the exact accounts that were posting several things, to discover the bot networks that were associated with certain narratives, and to discover the certain accounts and the history of these accounts that were sharing a certain narratives. And when we look deeper into these accounts, we see that, for example, they were created in Russia. They have, they previously, before they started working, for example, right, for a certain disinformation account, they were posting in Russian, in Cyrillic. So attribution is possible, and it's actually very important to be aware of that. It is with OSINT techniques, with other analysis techniques, you really can attribute certain themes to disinformation actor. The issue that I mentioned before is misinformation, right? After some time, the narrative gets widespread. So obviously, after some time, it is not only the disinformation actors that are posting about, how migrants are dangerous, how migrants are raping Polish women, right? Because these are the things that are being promoted. It's also normal voters. It's also real citizens, real people. The issue here, however, is that I would highly recommend observing the discourse evolution. So when we look at Cebosys, so Polish pollings for like 2 years ago or something like that, you could see that our negative sentiments against migrants was much lesser than it is now. It is now because of the fact that these disinformation campaigns, that they were so intense and that a lot of politicians decided to take on that issue, that now it is actually when you're asking citizens, what is your biggest fear? They're going to answer migration. But before, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that wasn't the case as much.
Thank you. Martyna, I don't know, would you like also to comment on that?
Maybe just briefly, I obviously agree with everything that Aleksandra said. And I think, well, the most important thing to say here is that everybody is entitled to their opinions, whatever those opinions are. This is the space that we have in the European Union. What is the tricky part here is to identify the source of a specific narrative. So exactly as Aleksandra is saying, sometimes a message is being put into the information environment via a Russian actor. And in some countries, like Poland, for example, an additional effort is made to obscure the source. So you really need some skills or tools or knowledge to identify that the source is coming from the pro-Kremlin ecosystem. When you know that, when, for example, you have a source like Sputnik, everybody knows by now, I think, that this is a Russian source and it's not to be trusted. However, if you see an opinion somewhere on, for example, a parenting discussion forum, I saw such examples, which is exactly in line with what you would read in Sputnik, then you can't really say, okay, this is a Russian disinformation narrative, even if in principle it is. But you can't really say that without checking it using specific tools, whether it's actually someone connected to the ecosystem promoting this narrative. This can be an accidental person, and then our hands are tied, obviously, because, as I said, everybody is entitled to their own opinions. But this is exactly what the threat actors, including Russia, are playing at. They are hiding the source of their message. They are putting it in different parts, very different sometimes, of the information environment, hoping that the narrative will be picked up. And sometimes it is even picked up by mainstream media, or even, as we just saw in Poland yesterday, by mainstream politicians. You could see this very strange, in my opinion, example of which came from Russian Telegram accounts, as allegedly European leaders on the train to Kiev were taking drugs. And all of a sudden, this is picked up by politicians in Poland, which who I think in most cases don't have anything to do with Russian propaganda as such. But the narrative is out there. It's just it's too tempting for some people not to pick it up, and this is how it works.
Thank you so much. So let's move to Péter Krekó to show how Russia exploits internal vulnerabilities in a more ambivalent or even compromised national context. So Péter, could you describe the Russian disinformation landscape in Hungary, especially one hitting Ukraine directly or indirectly? So major narratives, disinformative stories. How does it look like in Hungary?
Yes, thanks, Karolina, and I'm happy to be here in this discussion, and pretty timely, and unfortunately also quite important in the sense that Hungary, I think, is to a certain extent, a laboratory of post-truth and disinformation tactics, and a sad reminder that in environments where the government and the mainstream politics is highly supportive towards Russian disinformation narratives, then it can have an even bigger impact on the public opinion. Why I'm saying that? We have many polls in Hungary that have indicated that at the beginning of the invasion, for example, Russian invasion against Ukraine, a majority of the voters of the pro-governmental Fidesz party, for example, were first blaming Russia for the invasion, and all the other players came later in the blame game. Before the 2022 elections in April, when the government have launched a very intense campaign blaming the war practically on Ukraine and on Brussels and the West, the public opinion of the pro-governmental voters have shifted considerably. And what we saw is that even 2 years ago already, majority of the Fidesz voters blamed Ukraine first, America second, and then came Russia. So only in 3 months' time, practically, or less than 3 months' time, the public opinion have shifted, or at least in the pro-governmental camp. And generally, I would say that Hungary can be characterized more of an informational autocracy where the conspiracy theories and disinformation are mainly coming from the mainstream. So the major source of disinformation are the official, semi-official, or governmental sources. And as Martyna had mentioned, the peace narrative. So peace narrative is the most dominant narrative in Hungary when it comes to Ukraine at the moment, the so-called peace narrative, which is about that if you give more financial, or not to say military, support to Ukraine, then you're just prolonging the war, and it's an ultimate danger for the whole Europe, can result in the Third World War, and so on and so on. Everyone in the audience knows this narrative, so I don't have to go into details. Currently, there are 2 ongoing campaigns that are running parallelly. There is one consultative referendum that the government have launched that aim to argue against the accession of Ukraine to the European Union, highly exaggerating the financial risks, the demographic risks, and of course the security risks that would be associated with such a move. And this is also pretty bizarre in the sense that the Viktor Orbán's government is on power for 15 years already, but they have launched this so-called consultative referendum just to show to Brussels that the majority of the public opinion, or of course it's practically a push-pull, so a fragment of the Hungarian public opinion is strongly against Ukraine's accession. And there is another hot topic at the moment. There is an intelligence and counterintelligence war happening between Ukraine and Hungary. And it started a few days ago by the Ukrainian authorities, or the Ukrainian secret services have released some information that, according to their report to Ukrainian individuals working for the Hungarian secret services, started to examine the possibility of a Hungarian attack against Ukraine. We don't know how credible these reports are, but it resulted in a huge, very intense bilateral conflict in which in which Hungary even expelled 2 diplomats from the Ukrainian embassy, claiming that they were agents working undercover, and also in a very theatrical way, they arrested a Ukrainian national who they claim are working for the secret services. So in short, right now we have almost, I mean, war rhetoric towards Ukraine these days. And unfortunately, what we could see in the last 2 years, practically, that Hungary have increasingly, Hungarian state and its actors, proxies, politicians, opinion leaders on the governmental side, so-called public media, have been all supporting Russian narratives in the information space. And we could also see that they were supporting some Russian interests in the European Council as well. Hungary is not the only country where we can see that, but maybe I would leave it to a second question.
Yes, listening to you, we have this title of the webinar, Russian Disinformation Against Ukraine, but I have a feeling that in Hungary, a lot of that is a Hungarian disinformation against Ukraine. So do you think they somehow cooperate with each other, or just Hungarian government is being inspired by votingly effective themes from Moscow?
Yeah, brilliant question. I think that first of all, the most important goal of the government is to reproduce its own political support. They have the experience from the last parliamentary election in 2022 that with this pro-peace rhetoric, they can pull the Hungarian public opinion to their side, because there are very strong security needs in the Hungarian society. So we can just explain it on the basis of domestic political interests. But there is, of course, more than that, because there is cooperation between some Russian propagandists, some of them working in the Russian consulate, some of them working in the Russian embassy, and Hungarian editors and people working in the Hungarian propaganda apparatus. And also what we can see is that the stories originally that the Hungarian government circulates, or in the Hungarian pro-governmental media, they are circulating, the origin of them is usually either Russian official sources, or, for example, Russia Today and Sputnik, I mean, two media outlets that are officially on the sanctions list of the European Union since 2022, still they appear as credible sources in the Hungarian pro-Russian, pro-governmental media. So I think it's dominantly serves domestic political purposes, but highly inspired, as you said, by Russia. And also the sources themselves and the narratives themselves are more produced in Moscow and imported to Hungary.
Thank you so much. Okay, so last but not least, let's complement this first round with Yevhen, grounding the discussion in the lived Ukrainian experience. So, what are the most important takeaways about Russian disinformation against Ukraine?
Hello, dear colleagues. Many thanks, Karolina. And at first, I want to underline that Russian disinformation in Ukraine, it's not about mass media, it's not about social communication, it's about industrial impact on brains of millions and millions of peoples in Ukraine, not only in Ukraine, European Union, in Russia, about Victory Day in May, for example, or about image of enemy of Ukraine for Polish people. I want to present 10 key points about Russian disinformation in Ukraine, because I want to propose a short versions of Russian propaganda and disinformation activity. Russian disinformation rooted in Soviet ideological foundation, but very active used modern information tools. It about great USSR, about Stalin, father of people, like it was in Soviet in World War II. But today it's about Putin with Instagram, with TikTok, with Telegram channels. And second, the main channels of disinformation are anonymous Telegram accounts, Telegram channels, and maybe second, it's TikTok. TikTok and sometime Instagram. Third, Russian disinformation very effectively used and can instrumentalize image of very vivid. For example, a crucified boy in Russian "Распятый мальчик." It was very interesting fake with big impact, fake that create a wave of mobilization in occupied by Russia eastern regions of Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk in 2014 year, and wave of mobilization of people in Russia who want to give armed in and weapon in armed and became soldiers of Donetsk and Lugansk people republics. Fourth, Russian propaganda based on the dehumanization of Ukrainian and denial of Ukrainian statehood as such. The main idea of Russian propaganda is Ukraine cannot exist. It's the main idea, and it's the main line of Russian propaganda disinformation, not only in Ukraine, but maybe in all the world. Fifth, Russian disinformation is very flexible. For example, after start of full-scale invasion, Russian propaganda says about fighting NATO in Ukraine. But after Donald Trump inauguration, the new idea is about bad Europeans who don't want to create a peace agreement in Ukraine, and about Euro-fascists on side of investigate service of Russia. And it's not a joke. It's a case of Russian propaganda. Russian propaganda very clear target on main politicians and provokes internal conflict. For example, it's the last year conflict, not NATO, but very strong conflict in media, in Telegram channels, in fakes, in rumors. Conflict between Volodymyr Zelensky and Valery Zaluzhin, chief commander of Ukrainian army. And now Zaluzhny is our ambassador in Great Britain, and we have another chief commander, Aleksandra Syrsky. Russian disinformation very active used terminology from World War II and Cold War about Nazis, about Banderivtsi. It's for people who was a target of Soviet propaganda after World War II. And it's I think that it's effective tool for impact on brains of these people. Russian propaganda inflames historical and inter-ethnic tensions. You know about Volyn tragedy and problem between Poland and Ukraine in this question, and about situation with Hungarian minority in Ukraine. You know about arrest of ex-Ukrainian diplomat in Budapest, and and arrest of two Hungarian spies in Ukraine, who was a former serviceman and servicewoman of Ukrainian army. And Hungary intelligence create a chain of spy in Ukraine, and it's a very interesting fact about NATO country and member of European Union. The next one, Russian propaganda very active used fake news, and used not only Sputnik media. After 2022, the power of Sputnik media became low. But today, the main locomotives of Russian fakes became a Russian official information agency, like TASS and RIA Novosti. And maybe last point is about root of Russian propaganda. I think that Ukraine's long period without statehood, it's our common problems, because many citizens of Ukraine can trust in informal communications, rumors, and I think that it's problem. But the last point, that fake news of Russian propaganda is a cheapest weapon of mass influence, and the situation in last 3 years can underline this fact.
Thank you. So very little follow-up question. How Ukrainian people, do Ukrainian people believe this Russian propaganda? How vulnerable are Ukrainian people to disinformation?
I think that the main, our common Ukrainian problem is non-understanding effect of war between Russia and Ukraine in time between 2014 and 2022. And February 2024, millions of Ukrainian peoples understand that war continue 8 years. I think that in democratic state, we cannot see a situation like North Korea, or people think only about Kim Jong-un, or only about his negotiations with Putin. We have problems, but I think that Russian propaganda not very effective, but they can pay big money. Russia in this year and last year paid near $4 million every day on propaganda in Ukraine and Europe.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's come back to the pan-European perspective, the European perspective, and to Martyna. I would like to ask you, I think it's related to the follow-up questions, but when I'm listening to you, I have a feeling that we can or we do live in some kind of a matrix, and you cannot tell anymore if something is one's real thoughts, the result of their human intelligence, or is it like the mix of and balance of different disinformative and manipulative narratives. So how vulnerable are Europeans to disinformation, to Russian disinformation? And also I see there is a question to you from our audience. So recently France and Poland signed a new treaty. How do you see this new link and the French attitude towards Russia, which is more aggressive than in the past?
Thank you very much. By the way, I also see another question in the chat that is addressed to me. Should I tackle all of them together?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
So maybe starting from your question, Karolina, about vulnerability. Everybody is vulnerable. Everybody, including myself, being an expert in this topic. I, for example, discovered a few years ago when I became a mother, how vulnerable I became to narratives that were completely neutral to me before I became a mother. There is always something that will try to trick us or that will tickle us, so to speak, that will address our own vulnerabilities. What our defense can be to this is making sure that we know what we are vulnerable to, and that it's also, well, that's the sad truth. It's more difficult right now to find credible information. We need to look for it a little bit more. We need to have this kind of approach to the news that will ensure that we have sources that we trust, but that we also verify information. The times when we could just go somewhere to a website or to a TV channel or somewhere online and just have the information and be sure it's right, those times are gone for now, unfortunately. And sorry to be the bearer of bad news here. That said, I don't think we are completely hopeless here, not at all, actually. And I've been part of the team that has been drafting solutions to this, which is, I hope, a good segue to one of the questions I see in the chat, which is about current, sorry, I'm just reading out from the chat, current EU and national level efforts, including Poland's, whether they are sufficient to meet the scale and complexity of Russian disinformation campaigns. I think every little bit counts. I have been on this job long enough to remember when there was no response whatsoever, or there were scarce responses which didn't really have a huge scale, and there was not even awareness big enough for us to, in the European Union and in specific member states as well, to realize that we're up against really multiple threat actors having the whole state apparatuses against us. So what Poland has been saying for many years now, and what the Baltic states, what Ukraine has been saying for so many years, is now actually in the mainstream narrative of the European Union as such, regarding Russia, regarding how it's acting in the information environment and how those acts in the information environment are part of a bigger threat. So it's not about what some people called a battle of narratives. It's really a threat to our security, to our democracy, to our institutions. So I think with this realization came also some of the solutions. We have the whole, sorry for the EU jargon, it's called FIMI toolbox. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we have a toolbox. By us, I mean the European Union, its partners, its member states, obviously as well. And in this toolbox, there are multiple tools, of course, as in any toolbox, that could make us that could make this fight easier, and depending on where you are, whether you're a civil society actor or a journalist or someone like me, for example, working in in the European institution, you have different levels, different possibilities of monitoring, reacting, and also proactively securing the space in the information environment to make sure that the space for disinformation is at least limited. So we are talking about different kinds of situational awareness, like OSINT tools, monitoring, and so on and so forth that we've been building for years now. Capacity building, education, media literacy, fact-checking, but also proactive communication, which from where I am is absolutely crucial, because this is how you exactly secure the space. You make sure that your narrative, the facts are there, and so the space for disinformation actors is a little bit smaller. But you also do that by disruption, by more decisive means, which were not available just a few years ago. I'm thinking about sanctions, for example. It was mentioned before that there are several Russian outlets on the EU sanctions list. The list actually goes beyond RT and Sputnik at this point. We have I don't remember exactly, but over 20 outlets on this list, and we have several dozens of people that are connected to the Russian disinformation ecosystem that are under the EU sanctions regime. So this, of course, this doesn't prevent disinformation totally, but it makes the space that we are operating in a little bit more secure and a little bit less accessible to those threat actors. That said, I don't think we are doing enough, but I do think that we have all tools available, and the work is really taking place every day, and it should take place every day to make our information environment more secure. What is also important, and this brings me a little bit back to what you were asking about, Karolina, about vulnerabilities. We also need to realize that this work will never be done. This is why it's so important to do it every day. It's not like, you go to a training and then you're aware of everything that is happening. You are just immune, like, you would take a vaccine and it's done. You're done for life. It's more of a COVID vaccine, if I am to continue with this metaphor, because you need to renew it every few months. And so I think this is the crucial thing. About France and Poland, I do see that the awareness of the problem is very much there. France, I think, has changed quite a lot when it comes to their approach to FIMI and disinformation, so foreign information manipulation and interference, as we like to call it in the EU, and disinformation as well. So I think Poland and France see the problem and the threat in the same way. They do have different institutional approaches to fighting it. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's really, this is exactly also what our FIMI toolbox is about. You pick the tools that are right for your particular situation. So France built an institution a few years ago that is monitoring, analyzing, and then raising awareness about specific information manipulation operations. It's called Visionum. It's independent and it's well established by now, with very good methodological and analytical approach, very, very sound, I would say. While Poland went for a more, we could say, that dispersed approach, but again, I'm not saying this is worse or better. It's just a different approach of coordinating different institutions, and also now building this resilience council where civil society and academia are to help the administration also fight disinformation and recognize it. So I think, again, every little bit counts. So this new treaty, even though I don't think it mentions FIMI directly, I'm not entirely sure. It does tackle the threats of today in the right way, so to speak, and the recognition of FIMI, of disinformation as one of them, is essential here.
Thank you so much. Now, again, a compound question to Aleksandra this time. What are the real life effects, in your view, to disinformation in Poland, for example, in the context of the ongoing presidential campaign? And as I promised, it will be a compound. How is Poland countering disinformation in terms of ongoing presidency? but also the Digital Services Act that we behind with implementation. Perfect timing for that. And I see there's one question here for you as well. So many young people get their news from social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. How can we make fact-based pro-democratic content more visible and appealing?
Okay,
And
first.
2 minutes. No,
Okay.
I'm joking.
Okay, start.
Maybe 4.
Okay, so to start with real life effects, they're actually very grave. And that, again, I would reflect on what Martyna said about her experience as a mother, because I think wellness and our health is this sphere where we see this direct influence of disinformation the most. Right? When we fear about our own health or about the health of our closest ones, our families and friends, we are the most vulnerable. And thus, I believe that it is actually around the wellness sphere when these effects, as I said before, are the gravest. There are several examples. First, for quite some time now, I've been monitoring a few groups about natural parenting on Facebook. What I see there, I started to do that just before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. And obviously, disinformation narratives appeared there. People, they were afraid about the vaccine, they were asking questions. But let's say it was more of a disinformation rather than the conspiracy theory. Now, 5 years later, we're in a situation where high number of group members are asking how to not vaccinate their children at all and how to not to grant them PESEL number, so like a Polish social security number, right? And these are the decisions that people are making. Of course, what I'm saying is just like a small sphere, very much into conspiracy. So it's, just small percent or a promille of the society. But this is a real effect. Then currently we're seeing, right, the rise of illnesses, like in Polish we would call it błonica. I have literally no idea how the sickness is called in English, but generally it's a illness that was eliminated throughout the vaccine. And now we are seeing that again. Another illness called coughing krztusiec. So sorry for our English-speaking people, but generally this sickness that makes people cough, a whooping cough. Exactly. Thank you so much, Martyna, right? We haven't seen that amount of whooping cough for years. And now we're seeing a huge increase. So the real effects are there. Not to mention how the swift of how this information influenced our general debate. I already mentioned our attitudes towards migration, that let's say 2-3 years ago, of course, there were people who are critical, there were people who are more far right, who are more critical, but let's say the consensus was somewhere different. And now we see a huge swift. So that's another effect, because that influences not only our political decisions, but also our daily life decisions, and for example, increases the number of violence acts against people of color, again, against migrants, etc. So that's another thing. And then last but not least, you mentioned the presidential elections themselves. When we look at what the candidates are saying, in comparison with what was happening in the previous presidential election 5 years ago, we too see how this discourse has shifted. And that again, that leads, of course, like in Poland, president, despite what is being said throughout the debates, his competencies or her competencies are generally limited. But nonetheless, the person has a strong impact on the discourse and sometimes, all the negative powers. And that, like for real, it influences the political decisions that are being made. So disinformation is real and it affects us all. It affects our health, it affects our children's health, it affects, a lot of political decisions in a way that I think is more greater that we tend to assume. So that's one thing. The second question was about how Poland is fighting disinformation. And my favorite question about the DSA in Poland. So obviously, Poland has numerous institutions that are fighting and countering disinformation, including NASK, so let's call it a Polish cybersecurity agency. We have other departments, and for example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is the National Resilience Council that Martyna has mentioned. So there are institutions, they are doing that, and they're also cooperating at the EU level. throughout, again, various ministries, but also projects like EDMO and Central European Digital Media Observatory, for example, and the general EDMO network. So this is happening. And again, everything counts. So every small piece of action against disinformation counts. But obviously, we do need much greater coordination between the different subjects, the different organizations countering disinformation. We need a greater international cooperation, and we need a DSC, Digital Services Coordinator. Without it, Poland, who is supposed to be, Poland is at the forefront of disinformation, right? We are targeted with numerous narratives. We are targeted with numerous inauthentic, coordinated actions. Maybe not as much as Romania or Moldova, but let's say after these countries, after first Ukraine, then Romania, Moldova, etc., we are at the third place, I would say, from different countries of the EU. So we should have all the legal tools necessary to be able to counter disinformation. And not only disinformation, because obviously DSA is more about incitements to violence, illegal content, illegal hate speech, and all of that. So I'd say this is very much needed. And I think like 2 days ago, weren't we just sued by the European Commission for not implementing it properly? Yes. So that's a good place to start, implementation. And then the third question that I've seen, that is how can we make fact-based pro-democratic content more visible? There are several answers to that. Of course, first, quality of the content. So we need to have just experienced communicators who are doing that. We need to do that content. But actually, some organizations are already doing very good, very engaging, interesting content that is like as written here, right? Pro-democratic, fact-based, fact-checking. But it also, for example, the recommender systems of the platforms themselves that are more promoting content that is actually anti-democratic. For example, and I was just reading that 2 hours ago, 2 studies were recently published in May. This is the preprint, so not fully official, but it's accessible for anyone who wants to find it online. And both of these studies focused on recommender systems throughout the US 2024 presidential elections. They did a huge trial with sock puppets accounts that were initially not interested in politics at all. They were just focused on, cuisine, how to cook a good aubergine, things like that. But then, after a few months of scrolling, not less than a few months of scrolling, after a very short period of time of scrolling, even these accounts got targeted with messages like Elon Musk's or with far-right content. So we can do a lot, but without the change in how the recommender systems work, we can do all the best and still be slightly underprivileged in this fight. And then last but not least, one little point that I wanted to mention, I will be super quick and brief. AI is not only about AI that is creating this information, but we also need to be aware that Russian disinformation actors and other disinformation actors are feeding AI with disinformation. For example, previously Martyna mentioned the Pravda network and Sputnik. Sometimes if you do a search with ChatGPT, what you see is that the results are based on, for example, sources from Pravda or Sputnik. So this is outside of what I was saying before, but I just want to emphasize this. So even when reading answers that we get from AI, we need to really check the sources that the AI was working on, because sometimes they're not accurate and very much Russian. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Rigged. So the influence, as you were saying in the beginning, the real effect of Russian disinformation flooding and pollution. Okay, so now a compound question to Péter. So what is at stake with this ongoing disinformation war that is taking place in Hungary that you were explaining to us? And the second question, how vulnerable is the Hungarian society? And if you could somehow compare it to maybe other nations in the EU or in the region.
Yes, thank you. So I think as Martin have already referred to it, this is not only a war of narratives. We still, I think, many people and even some decision makers just downplay the importance of this information. It's just talk. You have to do some counter messaging. You have to, do the better talking. No, the stakes are way higher than that. So Hungary blocks the opening of the first cluster in Ukraine's EU accession negotiations, and also it would like to pull other countries to the minority that can block the EU decisions regarding Russia and Ukraine focused decisions. So Slovakia is, of course, a question. Slovakia seems to be a country that is, on the one hand, domestic politically doing something highly similar, or Robert Fico at least, and its coalition partners than Orban is doing. And we can just remind ourselves that Robert Fico had been participating on the 9th May parade in Moscow. No other EU leaders have done that, which is also a symbolic display of a support towards Vladimir Putin that not even the Hungarian government dared to do so far. So Slovakia is a country in question, and also Romania will be a country in question, in the sense that the presidential candidate Simeon, if he happens to win the elections, of course we have to see the results of the second round, then there can be a danger as well that Hungary will not be the only one after that wants to block Ukraine-related decisions, especially when it comes to EU accession, especially when it comes to weapon transfers, especially when it comes to financial aid. So the stakes, in short, is the future of Ukraine in that sense. And I think the future of Ukraine is the future of Europe and the future of the Western world as well. So I think for that reason, it is crucially important to recognize the importance of this whole story. And also, we could just observe that countries like the United States could also experience a spread of pro-Russian disinformation narratives, especially on the Republican side. And it is the party of Ronald Reagan, where, according to some polls, Russian disinformation could have, again, a huge impact. And at that point, I would just, call out the elephant in the room. Politicians themselves, I think, have a huge responsibility when it comes to the spread of pro-Russian disinformation narratives. How vulnerable the Hungarian society is? Yes, pretty vulnerable, according to comparative polls that we at the Hungarian Digital Media Observatory, connected to EDMO that was mentioned, done together with the Bulgarian, Romanian, and the Central European Digital Media Observatory. So we found that Hungary and Bulgaria have been in this in the sample of 4 countries, the most vulnerable to Russian disinformation. 62% of Hungarians thought, for example, that Ukraine have previously committed genocide against Russian minority living on its territory. In Bulgaria, it was 44%. In Czech Republic and Slovakia, we found lower ratios, about 1/3 of the population. But yes, there are differences. But I think it is also important to say that all the countries are vulnerable to Russian disinformation. As the war gets longer, as the price of supporting Ukraine gets higher, even if it's still very low, we'll have to repeat it again and again. there are no countries that are vulnerable, not even Poland, not even the Baltic states. And for that reason, I think it's very important to keep up the fight and to do it continuously. And even in highly challenging environments like Hungary, we can see that some good, even fact-based initiatives can have notable success. For example, our fact-checking partner Lakmus in Hungary, in a country where we have 8 million voters practically, could reach in less than 2 years more than 2 million people, individual users with their fact checks. So it's more than 1/4 of the population. And I think there are creative tools to reach the population. I don't think that any kind of counter messaging, any kind of fact checking is boring by nature and should be avoided.
Thank you so much, Peter. So again, last but not least, Yevhen. So I have again a compound but short question. One of these is, because you gave us a comprehensive list describing the Russian disinformation against Ukraine in our first round. Now I would like to ask you, how do you know it's Russia behind it, behind all of that? How do you know that it's not, for example, some anti-Zelensky actors within Ukraine? So it's one. And the second, you are geographically, at least, but altogether, at the forefront of the fight against Russian disinformation as Ukraine. You are the first ones. Is there anything that we, either Europe, can learn from Ukraine? Any example to follow in how Ukraine fights disinformation?
It's very difficult to create good media literacy and critical thinking in wartime, because when we create the critical thinking, we undermining our Ukrainian propaganda. We can discuss about quality of Ukrainian propaganda, but we cannot undermine these efforts. I see that many Ukrainians can understand that Russian Telegram, for example, Russian-speaking Telegram channels, it's a source of Russian propaganda and anonymous but Russian propaganda activities understand this fact, and we can see a case of mimicry for Ukrainian speaking in social media. I think what in eastern and southern regions, the efforts of Russian propaganda is more successful, but in western and in Kiev, the ideological resilience more strong. But we must understand that after full-scale invasions, we have a mix of populations of many regions. For example, peoples from eastern regions now live in Kiev, and people from Kharkiv, for example, or Dnipro can be refugees in European Union. It's few millions of our citizens today situated in European Union, and they can be channels of Russian propaganda, because they take from Russian-speaking Telegram, for example, fakes and shares it in Polish society, in Czech society, in Germany society, because in Germany today more than 1 million of Ukrainian refugees. In final, I want to underline one fact for all my European colleagues. You cannot prepare to war if you don't understand the mechanisms of Russian propaganda. Because propaganda is, I think, because I am a civilian, I'm not a military, but I think that propaganda today is the main weapon in contemporary world. The Russia-Ukrainian war is not war for territories. It's war for our brains, a war for our points of view on our independence and our sovereignty.
And we are all vulnerable. Thank you so much. Thank you. My sincere thanks to all the panelists. So to Martyna Bildziukiewicz, Aleksandra Wójtowicz, Péter Krekó, and Yevhen, Magda, as well to our audience for your presence and also for your questions. Still this week, you will find a article report summarizing all of our discussion with the quotes from all our panelists on EURACTIV Poland. It will be available in both Polish and English languages. And so it has been a very rich and dense discussion, but it still leaves us with a sense of insufficiency. And that only means one thing, that we need a sequel. So thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.